Hi, I'm Dianne Steepro, and I'd like to welcome you to Jeffersonville Township Public Library. Um, we are hosting today Dianne Dotson and Gareth L. Powell. They are husband and wife, and they are also both very honored science fiction writers. You can check out their books at our library, and many of Gareth's are also available through the Indiana State Online Library, which you can access through our website. So with no further ado, I'll let them take it away.
Hi, I'm Dianne Dotson. I also go by a newer pseudonym, Jendia Gammon. So you'll probably mostly find me as Jendia going forward, although my currently published books are still under Dianne Dotson, and I am a Nebula and BSFA Award finalist, science fiction and fantasy and horror author of The Inn at the Amethyst Lantern and The Shadow Galaxy, as well as the Questrazon Saga space opera novels, Heliopause, Ephemeris, Accretion, and Luminiferous. And in spring of 2024, I will be publishing under the name Jendia Gammon 2 different horror novels, one of which is called Doomflower, out from Encyclopocalypse Publications in April, and Atacama, which is more of a thriller sci-fi horror, coming out in May 2024 from Slay House Publications. I'm also a science writer and artist, and of course, as Dianne has mentioned, I am married to British author Gareth L. Powell, so I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, yeah, I'm Gareth L. Powell. I've written 20 books. I'm not going to hold them all up because that'll take all day. But my most recent novel was Descendant Machine. My next novel, which is out next year, is already for pre-order. That's called Future's Edge. But Descendant Machine and many other books are currently available, including About Writing, which is my guide for aspiring authors and creative writers who want to get into the novel writing business.
So we're here to talk about genre and about some of our plans and craft and things like that. And I want to mention also that as Jendia Gammon and Gareth L. Powell, we are forming a cross-genre publishing imprint that we will do a big launch for in mid-July, about a week before San Diego Comic-Con. Then you will see a book cover reveal for our very first book that will come out early next year. And this anthology features currently 30 different authors from science fiction, fantasy, and horror. We have many award winners and nominees and people who have been in traditional publishing a long time and more recent debuts as well. So stay tuned for that, and you'll want to keep up with us on our websites. And mine is jendiagammon.com. That is JendiaGammon.com.
Mine is simply enough GarethLPowell.com.
So Gareth, what would you like to talk about today in terms of science fiction? Do you have any ideas?
I would like to talk about why my neighbor thinks now is the best time to start bashing and hammering at his car just outside my window. So
isn't that the way it goes?
Hopefully the mic won't pick too much of that up.
No, I don't hear it.
Yeah, I mean, talking about the imprint, I mean, the lineup of authors we've got is fantastic, and it's very exciting to be launching a new publishing venture. Well, I mean, we've both been traditionally and self-published, but to actually sort of take the jump from authors to publishers and be publishing some authors who are, you know, colleagues, and some are writers we greatly admire. It's extremely exciting. And there's such an array of talent that I think it's very important at the moment to be really celebrating the huge amount of talent we have across the genres of science fiction, fantasy, horror, because the entire industry is in chaos, really, in some ways, and it's great to be really focusing on the writers.
Right, correct. And I feel like this is a really good time. It's a very interesting time in publishing in which we don't know a lot. A lot of things are changing very quickly. technology is becoming a blessing and a curse. We have greater access to more readers than we've ever had in human history. And now we have a non-human entity entering the room in terms of AI. This is something that Gareth and I are taking head on, and we choose to publish writing that is not assisted with AI tools. And we also are choosing artists who do not use AI for their artwork. We are celebrating human-made writing and art, because we are human writers and artists. And we hope to feature many new authors as time goes on, this being the first anthology of many, and future ones will be themed. And we already have planned those out. Currently, we're in the crowdfunding phase of getting this imprint and the anthology up and running. And you can learn more about that via my Ko-Fi or Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/Jendia Gammon. And so, you know, this is a celebration. We have the experience, we have the know-how of being, you know, veteran writers. Both of us nominated. In Gareth's case, he's won a lot of awards. I've just entered traditional publishing last year. And so that was the first time I was ever eligible for award nominations. And I'm pleased to have got several this year. And we bring with us a lot of School of Hard Knocks, I think, experience in publishing. And we have made a lot of great connections in the science fiction community. It's a very interesting community to be part of. It does bleed through with fantasy and horror and even mystery. And so we're celebrating all of those genres as well. And what we've come to know each other because we were science fiction writers. We met on Twitter many years ago and became friends, and slowly went from there. So to this day, social media has also become a blessing and a curse, and it helped us connect, but also helps us connect to readers. And we love providing knowledge, you know, and wisdom. We don't claim that we own all of it, you know, that we know everything. You know, nobody knows everything. And with the volatility of publishing, all that we can say is that, you know, if you're thinking about writing, then do the work, do the hard work, write and write and write more, and read a lot, you know. And you can read the classics of science fiction of Bradbury, Asimov, Le Guin, but I also encourage you to read today's current writers who are offering groundbreaking and spellbinding words and expanding genre, and that's what we're celebrating. So definitely check out newer writers. You know, the veteran classic science fiction writers will always be there. We need to celebrate and uplift the newer generations coming forward, and keep, you know, making this a genre of possibility. So
That's absolutely right. I mean, any genre is always in conversation with itself. So the writers today have read all those classic books and are sort of taking it to the next level, and it's constantly evolving and constantly changing, and you're constantly getting new ideas fed in. So it's very much a vital and alive genre. And I'm talking here about science fiction, fantasy, and horror. They are very much always trying to bring something fresh to the table, always trying to put a new spin on things. So it's very worth seeking out stuff that's been published this year, as well as stuff that was like published in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s. So it's,
or even earlier.
yeah. So keep just keep investigating. The way I got into science fiction was, as a kid, my mother would take us to my local library every week and let me choose as many books as I wanted to. And you know, and then I would take them home and read them, and then sometimes we would end up going twice a week because I'd already read all the books, or what have you. And there was a huge sci-fi shelf, and I just worked my way through it. And, you know, that got me into it for life. It made me a reader for life. And I think whatever draws you in, and personally I went for sci-fi because I liked, you know, I read Star Wars comics and I wanted to find out more. But whatever draws you into reading, libraries play a huge and important part in that. But also, you know, if you get into reading through comic books, if you get into reading because you like audiobooks, whatever brings you into reading just can only enrich your life, I think. How did you get into
Well, it's interesting. I have also a library legacy. My father I grew up in the country. I was born in a small city called Kingsport, Tennessee, and we had the Kingsport Public Library, but my parents moved out to the country in Gray when I was a young kid. And so access was kind of limited. We didn't really have a great library at the time. It was a little teeny tiny one and almost like a shed. So my dad would drive me into town to Kingsport Public Library on some weekends, and then I would go and I would plunder as many science fiction, fantasy books as I could. Now, in terms of horror, I had the benefit of having older siblings, several years older, and so I would go and scoop up their sci-fi and horror books way too young an age for like Stephen King was a favorite, and I would read those and got through some tough times and some loneliness, having books as my companions and learning about art and craft and everything together. I feel like the library basically helped make me who I am today. And I always like to celebrate libraries in any form of media, right? Because you can have a physical book, or you can have something like the Libby app, which you can get most or all of my books on online, and then other forms of media as well. So that's how I first got into that. I also was a big fan of 80s, late 70s, and a lot of the 80s science fiction movies. And one thing I just didn't see enough of was myself in those movies, the strong women character. We did have Ripley, we had Leia to a certain extent, we had Sarah Connor, things like that, but there just weren't enough. I wanted more kick-butt gal stars, and so I decided I was going to start writing them myself. And so I did that. I wrote 2 full novels by the time I was 14. I had a very understanding and passionate English teacher who also taught science, and so she was very influential on both sides of my career. So she actually approached publishing companies on my behalf about those 2 books, but I chickened out, and I decided to pump the brakes. And then life and school and everything and work happened, and I was delayed a bit, and I came back to writing seriously in the early 2000s, but life again interrupted. But I persevered, and that's really the key of writing in any genre. And in science fiction, you're moving not only at the speed of light, not only at the macro universe level, but at the microscopic level and all, quantum level, everything in between, and keeping up with the science, which changes daily and sometimes several times a day, is a challenge. So writing science fiction has become a dance of trying to keep an open mind and not be restricted by, former structures, by past science, learning to make it weirder, make it so weird that, science isn't going to keep up with you, although eventually it might. And I have had a lot of fun using both the library as well as science news to kind of influence me. And my own science degree is in ecology and evolutionary biology. So I kind of look at things from a lens of where do we fit in our environment, and what are the interplays between us and, predators and prey and things like that, and our resources. And that's really rich landscape to dig into for your science fiction writing. But you also have to remember, even if you're writing about aliens or robots, you have to remember the human element and the craft of story. So I'll bounce it back to you for that, Gareth.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there is this stereotype that which sort of comes from the 1940s, I think, that science fiction is very not very well written. It's all about ideas. The characters are very wooden. The dialogue's terrible, blah, 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 blah. And these days, that simply is not true. There are writers writing in genre like David Mitchell, Margaret Atwood, who are writing books that are acknowledged classics as well as being genre books. So I think there is much more concentration on literary worth in genre now than there perhaps was in the dim and distant past. And so you will find stories that are as exciting as thrillers. You will find stories that are as intriguing as mysteries. You will find tales of exploration. You will find tales of vengeance, tales of love, tales of heartbreak. The whole human experience can be expressed through horror, through fantasy, through science fiction, because we can use those tools to kind of look at ourselves in different ways and look at ourselves. I think Stephen King, I can't remember the exact quote, but he said something about monsters do exist, they're just inside most of us. And so in horror, we get to look at the horrible, monstrous sides of ourselves, but also the courageous sides of ourselves and the sides of us that stand up to the monsters. So I don't think you can go into science fiction or horror expecting something that is substandard to more mainstream work. In fact, you go in there and you find a story that's probably more involving, probably more exciting, probably more thought-provoking. And that's because writers have to write, and writers want to write the best books they possibly can.
Right. And I want to add that, in finding ourselves in our stories, that sometimes, it's not even always about being brave or facing the monster, but it's also kind of just being introspective and trying to understand, how do we fit in this ever-changing, rapidly changing universe? And particularly the last 4 years, we had, a world-changing event with a pandemic that has changed the way we do things. It's actually fundamentally changed, I think, interaction online. We are leaning more heavily on it. That was going to happen anyway, but it kind of sped up a lot of things. And I have found that one thing I've understood by connecting more online is with all the different writers and across the genres, and understanding their humanity, and how genre, speculative fiction, science fiction, fantasy, and horror offer us a way to understand ourselves and the world around us, and to empower us, obviously, but also to make connections. We bond with people when we understand that they've been through similar things, and we've all been through something big the last few years. And I'm seeing a prolific explosion of genre writers in the past few years. You're seeing more of it because there are more people writing probably than ever, and having these tools to connect, with readers, with other writers, that's proven invaluable, and it's transformative. We're using this moment, this unprecedented moment in history, to expand our knowledge of the universe and ourselves, and of what it means to write, because I'm seeing a lot of really wonderful experimentation, not only with long fiction like books, but with short fiction, short stories, as well as shorter books, novelettes, which are basically like a really long short story, and novellas, which are sort of in between that and a full novel. There's a lot more of experimentation and celebration of these shorter books, which offer a very quick way to enter genre and enjoy, a story. Stephen King and Ray Bradbury and Ursula K. Le Guin were masters of short fiction, but you didn't really hear about it as much, before we had the internet, unless you happen to subscribe to a magazine like Asimov Science Fiction or Analog, or, one of those. You might not have had the access to those unless it was collected in a volume, which fortunately some of them were. But now it's out there. You can go and read anything at any length online. In your library, you can request volumes of books. Graphic novels, as Gareth mentioned, are highly valuable as well. That counts as reading at any age. And, and a lot of people I know entered writing because of comics and graphic novels. Like, I was powerfully influenced by DC Comics and even Archie Comics, so, right now it's just such a powerful moment of transformation, of understanding ourselves, of experimentation with words, injecting some poetry into your fiction. I'm seeing all kinds of wonderful structures changing in long fiction that used to be preserved for poetry. I find that very exciting. So I think this is if you have ever thought about writing, now's the time. And, do lean into the craft and learning how to do it. If you just enter some prompts into an AI system, you're not really writing. You have to kind of face yourself at the end of the day and do the work. And it is possible. Like, we're not operating in a vacuum. It does take time and work, and it takes other people's eyes on your work. You have to, at some point, let it go and be looked at, be edited, make it stronger, and then that's valuable. And that's human craft and art.
I absolutely agree. I think something you touched on as well is that reading a lot encourages us to develop empathy, because we have to put ourselves into other people's shoes. We have to understand the characters, and we get to see that other people go through similar things, or other people, have feelings. We get to imagine what it's like to be someone else living another life. And I think that's invaluable in helping us to relate to other people and develop our social skills. Was there a particular topic we were supposed to be talking about today? As a general discussion.
Personally, I would really love to hear a little bit more about what is in your books. Maybe just some for audience members who might be curious. What are the plot lines of some of your books? What are the themes you like to explore? I know Dianne has mentioned she likes to explore the theme of the strong female character who kicks some butt, and I like that too. But there are so many other possible ways you could take your fiction, and I'd like to hear about that.
Sure. So in the Questrazon saga, the space opera books that I wrote and published and were based on some of those original books that I wrote when I was a teenager. While the first book, Heliopause, has a man as a main character, the main character of the series is a woman, an alien woman who looks like a human. And I gave her the path to, in the first book, it's a man named Forster who realizes he's an ordinary person, a human with an extraordinary ability. And then Galadea in Ephemeris, Accretion, and Luminiferous is an extraordinary being who wants to be ordinary. And so I wanted to explore the themes of humanity, what it means to be human, what it means if you are technically a superhuman, what are your flaws and faults and vulnerabilities, and as you're learning your way through the universe in almost a childlike innocence, how do you fit into that? What's your role in that? So that was one thing I explored with the Questrazon saga books. And with my Nebula finalist, the Inn at the Amethyst Lantern, that's a 14-year-old teenager on the cover named Jinshin Lightworth, or Jin. And she lives in a future post-apocalyptic, but a hopeful one, several hundred years in the future, in which humanity has resorted to night living where she lives. And she lives in kind of a sheltered world in which all they've ever known is existing at night and relying on bioluminescence and light and moonlight and themes that are lunar punk, as we would call it in a subgenre of science fiction and fantasy. And she has never wanted to be a leader. All she wanted to do is to explore and read books. And then she suddenly has the keys to this mysterious derelict inn and its legacy that goes back hundreds of years, just in time to fight an ancient evil that emerges from our time in the future. And the themes I explore in this book, not only for Jin, but also for her friends and her family, and coming of age is one of the strong themes, that becoming a leader, learning when to step up when things don't go your way, facing imposter syndrome head on, and realizing that, it does take a village to fight things. A so-called chosen one actually relies upon a lot of other people. And she was not chosen for the things that, one would think. She was chosen because of her flaws, to try to fight this thing. It was up to her to make a good team to do that. So that's about growth and, imposter syndrome. And it's now been nominated for 4 different kinds of awards. And
Hey.
That's pretty cool. So I just found out yesterday, it's longlisted for the British Fantasy Award for fantasy novels, because it blends between science fiction and fantasy both. And it, of course, was a Nebula Award finalist. And it was also a BSFA Award finalist, British Science Fiction Association. And it's a finalist for something else I can't talk about yet, but which is really cool and meaningful. And then in the Shadow Galaxy, I have several stories, although not all, from the perspective of women or girls There are some other characters as well. This is a nice quick read that offers you science fiction, fantasy, and horror tales, and tales of adversity, adventure, romance, becoming who you are, discovering who you are, finding your limits, things like that. So those are some of the themes I explore in those books.
My my sort of most popular book, I think, is The Embers of War. It's a novel from Titan Books, came out in 2018. It's the story of a battleship who is self-aware, controlled by an intelligent computer, but she becomes disillusioned with her role as a battleship and resigns from the Navy and joins a rescue organization. And it's a theme that runs through most of my books, is she's trying to find out who she is and trying to understand her place in the world and understand what you can do if you've taken part in something like a war or some traumatic event, how you move on, how you live with it. So that was followed by 2 sequels. There was a Fleet of Knives, and then there's Light of Impossible Stars. And they tell her story and the story of her crew as they get involved in a big interstellar conspiracy and have to use their brains as much as their brawn to find their way out of it. Embers of War actually won the British Science Fiction Association Award for 2018, which I was very pleased with. I've also written a novella, which, as we were saying earlier, is quite a thin story, and I co-wrote that, Light Chaser, with Peter F. Hamilton, who is a best-selling British science fiction author. We had a lot of fun writing that. It's the story of an effectively immortal space trader going round and round the same route every 1,000 years to all these different planets. And then eventually she finds that her life isn't quite what she thought it was. And my 2 most recent books are set in against the same setting, but are standalone adventures in that they feature different characters. And the first one is Stars and Bones, which is very much a sort of space horror along the lines of The Thing or Aliens. If you like either of those movies, I think you'll pretty much dig that. And the other book in that series is, as I said earlier, Descendant Machine, which is set 75 years later with a completely different cast of characters. And that's more like a thriller. There's a mystery and a conspiracy and people rushing to try and find out what's happening and solve that. So there is, as I say, I've written lots of other books. I've written horror. I wrote a 3-book series about a talking monkey Spitfire pilot. But in all the books, I think the characters are slightly unmoored, and they are drifting around looking for ways to cope with the trauma they've experienced in the past and to work out who they are and to find families, I guess, and then build families and come to terms with themselves. So
Very good. I have 2 more questions for you both. The one I'm going to ask now and then come back to, because I think you'll want to think about it for a few moments. And that is, if you have a short passage that you are extremely proud of that you would like to conclude with today. So think about that while we're running through the next one, if you can process that in the back of your minds. And then the other question is, what kinds of involvement have you seen with writers using AI? If you've actually seen this happen, or artists using AI, we've had a lot of interest in AI and the problems and benefits it might bring among library users. And I think people will be very interested in anything that you have to comment about that as professionals. So.
I've been asked a lot over the years about future projections in both healthcare and science, as well as in fiction. And in 2019, before the pandemic hit, I was on a talk about what I saw was going to happen long term with AI before ChatGPT really came online, things like that. So it's kind of like that line in Blade Runner. It's either a benefit or a hazard. If it's a benefit, it's not my problem. But in my case, I'm also a science writer, and it is very much my problem because my field is disrupted with new work because, corporations are using AI instead of freelancers to write articles about science. And that unfortunately has led to some problems and its inaccuracies, because you still do need a human eye to collate information, and make sure you're getting it right and going in straight to the source and asking if you don't find everything in your research then. And I think that we can't be replaced in that regard. And in terms of fiction, it's one thing to want to write, but then you have to ask yourself, why are you writing? Because if you're wanting an AI to write for you, what's the point? What are you trying to do? We're seeing, and a lot of magazine editors are seeing, a huge amount of submissions of completely AI written stories and articles and things. And it's got so bad with such an influx that some of the magazine submissions have had to shut down because they were just bombarded with thousands and thousands of these things. And most of the time they're just completely unreadable. And the AI tools like ChatGPT and other things like that, and Midjourney for art, they're still in development. The problem that we have with some of those tools is that it scrapes content without the consent of the original creators. This has happened to a lot of artists I know that, illustrate this in the style of, and then it's going out and scraping the content from writers. It's also become a problem. I mean, artists, but also for writers. It was discovered recently that a lot of novelists their novels were being used to train AI without their consent, which enraged, understandably, a lot of people, because that's essentially plagiarism. And, I think that we need to step back and ask what we're doing here. Humans we're known for making art and writing, and have done for, as long as we've been human. We had cave paintings in Lascaux and petroglyphs and everything, and then working our way up to masterpieces. It's what are we doing? Why are we doing this? I know there's a lot of questions around it, but there's also a lot that people haven't got good answers for. And from my perspective, I'm very much understanding that we want things to be simpler in life, but that doesn't mean that we should give up our humanity to do that. I do think that AI plays a great role in science right now, combing through incredible amounts of data, but that's a different kind of AI, and for example, as a science writer, I see a lot of biotech news, and, when AI can sift through tons and tons of research and try to find new proteins to help find cures for disease, that's a valuable use of AI, and who knows where this is going to go. This is kind of a revolutionary point, kind of like when the internet came on board. We're at a really interesting time. I think a lot of companies are pushing it on us without our really needing or wanting it. And a lot of the, even social media, same deal. Things like Adobe, it's just there's a strong push, like this is the hot topic. Let's go for it. But I'm getting .com bust vibes from things lately. And I just think that if AI can be useful for something, it should be used to help us have better qualities of life and help the world, so if it's not doing that, I don't really understand why it's being used. We have at our disposal all these writers who you can go to and ask about craft, whose books you can read. You could still go to be educated at a formal school about it. You don't have to have a master's in writing. My degree is in science, but I've always been a writer, and it takes writing to be a writer. And if you just click a button, that's not writing.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, we should be using, AI for logistics, for in libraries you can use it for cataloging and so forth, or for easily cross-referencing. But there was that famous example last week where somebody was asked an AI for a pizza recipe and they were told to put glue on it. So
Yeah.
Sorry.
these things are sort of scooping up information from the internet, but they have no intelligence. So they're just putting patterns of words together. And that really worries me in healthcare when they seem to be pushing to try and get AI into diagnosing illnesses and things. And I think there are going to be problems. People are going to ask an AI if a certain mushroom is edible and it will turn out to be deadly, or they're going to ask AI how to fix a broken leg and it's going to suggest a plank of wood and 2 nails. So it's until we can actually rely on it to get things right and to have some kind of intelligence, then I think it's just possibly a very dangerous tool at the moment. And when it comes to writing and creativity, it seems absolutely pointless to me to just type in a few suggestions and press a button and think, oh, I have created some art, when what you've done is you've just asked the machine to look at all the images it's downloaded from the internet and just kind of mash them together in the lowest common denominator. And calling yourself an artist for doing that is like putting a microwave lasagna in the microwave for 10 minutes and calling yourself a master chef. It's just it's ridiculous. And the same with writing. What you're doing is you're just asking this machine, which is no smarter than the predictor on your cell phone when you're texting, which tries to guess what your next word is going to be. It's just a more complicated version of that. And you're asking it to create a work of art about the human condition, a story. And all it's doing is it's shoving together phrases that it's found in other people's work. And so it seems like an absolutely pointless exercise to me to use AI in that way. That it's for people who want to kind of trying to think of the best way to put it. People who want to tell other people that they're writers without having to do any of the work, and that just seems like fakery.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I will just to add, my husband works in it, I'll say an art adjacent field, and he was ordered to experiment with AI to create photographs of a hospital for a training video. That's basically what he does. He puts together training videos using artwork that's supplied by another member of his team. But they wanted to try to cut that person out, and it really couldn't do it. It looked like it would make good illustrations for a horror novel.
Yeah.
It was the most terrifying looking hospital I've ever seen. But it really doesn't quite. It's even I think people who think they're creating something really nice with AI are missing even the aesthetic judgment there to see that it's really not there yet. It isn't. It's not only copying other people's work; it's doing it very poorly.
Right. Yeah, it's not coherent enough. It doesn't matter. Like, why write if it doesn't matter? We write because that's our oxygen. This is what we do. This is how we explore our souls. That's what art is. Whether or not it is visual art, whether or not it is film, whether or not it's writing or music, that's the soul's meaning there that we're transforming, and sharing with the universe, that at the end of it, if we're not doing that, then we're not making art, so.
Yeah, I would say art is communication fundamentally, and one of these generative AIs doesn't have anything to say. So it's, as Shakespeare said, it's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
Or as someone else has put it, and I don't remember who it was, and I can't quote them, but more or less, if you can't even bother doing the work to write something, why should we bother to read it?
Yep.
Well, last question then. Do you each have a passage that you would like to show off?
I do. I'm just desperately trying to find it because I can't remember where in the book it is.
I
How
have
long,
that
how long do
problem
we have, Diane?
About, you could use as much as 10 minutes each and as little as whatever.
Okay, I will choose from my multi-award nominated The Amethyst Lantern, the chapter called Moonbow Valley. The early evening, still warm from the day's heat, unfolded in a vibrant parade of melodies across Moonbow Valley, which spread like a dark vein of life across the countryside to the northeast of the bay. Jen couldn't see the ocean from where she stood, but knew by the thin line of marine layer drifting in from the west that just over the next set of hills it was there. The heat of the northeast siphoned it in, and the cleft of a river cutting through the land made its way to what once must have been a rich delta to the north of the bay, which had long since dried up and given way to fertile farmland, which in turn was baked by the sun and then ultimately settled over time by small communities. Those communities gradually diminished as well, and finally the desalination projects moved in to help sustain the population until the climate, shifting back and forth, settled ultimately on something new and unpredictable. One unique thing began to occur, however, as prevailing winds shifted along the western and southern coasts, and that was the intake of marine moisture by the land itself. The lay of the land to the east allowed that moisture to collect and formed its own microclimate, creating Moonbow Valley. In that valley, trees had adapted to the harsher climate, and over the centuries, the tougher species with thicker leaves and hardier trunks grew to a great age, sheltering a vibrant ecosystem beneath among their canopies. The temperature differential between the canopy and the layers beneath it varied dramatically. In this way, Moonbow Valley could house permanent standing water in long sets of pools and small lakes deep beneath tree cover. There were springs also that bubbled up from deep below the valley, where a network of karst caves extended in all directions like its own arterial network. Those whose homes sat above natural caves benefited from a place of cooling refuge, but artificial caves, like the one beneath the Lightworth home, were much more common. Moonbow Valley's caverns were all natural, and they were labyrinthine, their waters pristine. Not many houses were built in the valley itself, though, due to the large numbers of caves beneath and the risk of cave-ins. Some sinkholes had formed over time, and while some were explored, others remained mysterious. Some were rumored to be hidden from the outside world, undiscovered by anyone. When the Fireflies stood awkwardly staring at the dark blue sky, that's the name of the teens group, with the vivid yellow moon above the deep green-black valley, they seemed for a moment quite small to Jen. They were part of this greater whole, sure, but teenagers rarely have time to think about such things. So busy are the many turbulent and wondrous thoughts tumbling about in their growing minds as they figure out their places in the universe. The valley, to Jen, seemed timeless somehow. Some part of her believed it had always been there, though she knew that valleys only formed over time and didn't simply appear fully formed. Listening to the crickets and katydids singing and scraping their calls into the pulsating night, Jen felt both part of the greater whole and yet insignificant at the same time. She didn't understand what it was she felt. She thought of her father, Harris. "Where are you, Dad? Are you okay? Why haven't you come back?" Jazz watched his sister stand at the edge of the valley on a little rocky outcropping overlooking it. "Jen," he approached her. He waved Datura away, and she seemed a tad miffed, but Jazz just wasn't the sort of 17-year-old who dwelt long on the concerns of others. He was always analyzing problems and making discoveries, and here he was watching a mystery unfold right before him for the first time, his younger sister. She looked back at him with her large dark eyes, messy indigo hair sprouting out at odd angles under a cap, and her mouth tightly drawn. "What are you doing?" he asked her. Jen looked out at the valley again and then back at Jazz. A few glider bikes sped around and down to where the group stood by the roadside waiting. "I don't know." Her eyes hurt from holding back tears. "I don't know what I'm doing, Jazz." Jazz folded his arms. "Yeah, I think we all get that from you right now." "What do I do?" Jen asked him desperately. "What did Bendon tell you? Tell us to do." "Find Andraste." "Then let's go find her." Jazz's tone was matter of fact. Jen snickered in spite of her wallowing doubt. "It's that easy for you, isn't it?" She marveled at him standing there so confidently. "Why didn't you pick him, Bendon?" She thought for the 1,000th time. Jazz sighed. "I don't know if it's easy, but it's what he told us to do. Specifically you. We're here, we're waiting." "But I don't know where Andraste is. She could be anywhere down there," Jen said, turning back to the valley. She could just see little glints of light of all colors winking on and off under the thick valley forest. She wondered if there were farmhouses, giant insects, robots, or something else entirely. Curiosity began to stir inside of her. "Nyota can help us once we're in. She's supposed to meet us there. Let's just get everyone down there together," Mira said from behind her cousins, giving Jen a reassuring pat on the shoulder. The rest of the group approached them. "Give everyone the cloaks, Jen." "Oh," Jen said, slipping the sack off her shoulder. "I almost forgot."
And left hanging.
Okay, I can't find the bit I was
Very
looking
good.
for.
All suspense.
I can't find the passage I was searching for, so I'm going to read chapter 1 of Descendant Machine, which, as I said, is my most recent novel. It came out last year. The cottage was real, but the mountain on whose side it stood was not. If you took your morning tea on the front doorstep, as was my habit, you could gaze past the hills on the opposite shore of the dark-watered loch at the foot of the mountain, to where, beyond their rolling tree-lined ridges, you could see the far wall of the giant artificial cavern in which this peak, the loch, and all their attendant foothills and forests were housed. The Ark had painted the wall in subtle hues of grey and blue to trick the eye and give the illusion of sky and distance, but it was still unmistakably a wall. On the 64th day of my stay in the cottage, as the artificial sky lightened towards dawn, I became distracted from my pyjama-clad contemplation of the distant wall by a movement on the loch's shore. Far below, the blue-skinned figure of the last person in the world to whom I wished to speak had begun to ascend the steep, winding path that led up from the jetty. I watched his slow, deliberate progress for the time it took to finish my tea, and then went back inside the white stone cottage without bothering to close the door. The interior still held the heat of the cooking fire. A copper kettle cooled on the hearth. The brightening day threw rectangles of brilliance across the floorboards. Spider plants and ivy trailed from countertops and windowsills. Books slumbered on sagging shelves. I emptied the kettle's remaining hot water into the sink. Then I rinsed out my cup and saucer and left them on the rack to dry. I had been living here in solitude for 9 weeks, and these morning routines had become important to me. They gave my day structure, keeping my hands and surface-level thoughts occupied so the rest of my mind could heal. My grandmother used to say, "We are always in the process of becoming the people we're supposed to be." But she never mentioned that the process can also work in reverse. Time and circumstance can rob us of parts of ourselves, forcing us to become something different, something less than what we were. And now, the party responsible for my loss had decided to pay a visit. The blue figure climbing towards my door was an envoy, a mixture of flesh and machine with no mind of its own. It was a sophisticated drone controlled remotely, and I already knew who would be peering out at me from behind its cerulean eyeballs. The frontier sheik. I had felt him approach. The frontier sheik was a scout craft, and I had been his navigator. Implants still joined our intellects on a subconscious level. These were necessary for him to be able to find a path through the substrate that lay beneath the physical universe. Computers couldn't do it. Only a biological mind could navigate that realm. When viewed through human eyes, the writhing chaos of the substrate collapsed into a navigable medium. By concentrating on a specific destination, the human brain could intuit a path through the strange, flickering light, a path invisible to artificial sensors and neurons. I had done that for him. I had enabled him to travel faster than light by taking a shortcut through the substrate, and in return he had protected me, right up until that last horrendous day.
Wow. Thank you both very much. I really appreciate your visiting with us today, and I look forward to seeing many more books from both of you. And I guess we'll be saying goodbye, and
Thank you.
thank you very much again.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.